Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and I hope you're doing well today. I have a movie review of a film from 2011. It was directed by David R. Ellis and was written by Will Hayes and Jesse Studenberg. I think that's how you say their name. I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. And the movie in question is Shark Night, also known as Shark Night 3D. I don't have the 3D Blu-ray on hand. I think it's kind of rare. So I have this DVD I actually picked up from a Dollar Tree not too long ago because I remembered the movie after not thinking about it for a long time. This is a movie, I've kind of shared in the past. When I was in high school, the kids in my grade and the grade above me, we loved going to see horror movies on release weekend. And this was a PG-13 3D horror film that came out around that time. And of course, I remember going to see this in almost a packed house full of teenagers in the 3D form with the 3D glasses and the whole gimmick. And everybody seemed to have a fun time with it. And I haven't seen it since. I mean, I used to catch snippets on it on ABC Family back in the day because right around the time when Pretty Little Liars came out, ABC Family started to kind of trickle, the amount of movies they would share around Halloween or throughout the year. And for some reason, Shark Night became like a staple. They would play this movie all the time in pretty much its full glory, minus a few things that they cut out because of the implications of the characters. But for the most part, it was the same movie. And I finally sat down and watched this thing a few nights ago for the first time in its entirety since I watched it in the theater. And I have to be honest, y'all, this wasn't that good. I want to say it's, bad either. It's kind of in the middle for me in terms of movies. Shark Night, in the concept of Shark Night, you have to know that this is a B movie, right? This was made in a time where, the late 2000s, early 2010s was a really weird time where films were being made in mind for that real D, 3D. And the horror movie subgenre saw a string of films that have pretty much historically been negatively backlashed against. This one is no exception. But this one was that, shark creature feature movie in that old B movie fashion. And seeing David R. Ellis, who directed Final Destination 2, which is my personal favorite of that franchise, and then the infamous The Final Destination, which is quite possibly one of the worst horror sequels ever made, which was also made in 3D. Seeing him, make this in a time where, you had Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer wanting to make more 3D horror movies, and then you had David Ellis make two, it makes this movie kind of weirdly dated because of that. You know what I mean? Like, when I think about this movie, I kind of associate it with the bad 3D movies of the time. And I'm not saying that all 3D horror movies from that time period were terrible or anything, but this one kind of sticks out for that, in my opinion. And if I'm being honest, y'all, in terms of like story and in terms of the film as a whole, this is kind of a nothing burger. There's not a lot to it. It's over the top for the sake of it. And it's kind of dumb, but that's the point of a B movie. It tries to emulate, the closest thing I could think of this, but it doesn't quite have that same level of charm, is maybe something like Eight-Legged Freaks from the early 2000s, which I think that's pretty much the textbook B movie from the 2000s or 2010s in my mindset, with like crappy CGI and all that. That has some charm to it. This, not so much. But to give you an idea of what the film's about, it's about this girl named Sarah and her eclectic group of friends. They're out in Louisiana at this family lake house. And in the prologue of the film, we see in that Jaws ripoff kind of way, this couple, they're out in the lake, I guess in the same area, and they're out swimming, and the boyfriend goes out to do his own thing. But while in the lake, the girl is being pretty much come after by a shark. Yeah, a shark inside of a lake. And I'm assuming it's a saltwater lake, but it's never really clarified. I guess it's Louisiana where the water mixes, so I guess it's fine. But something happens to the girl, but in that PG-13 way, so it's not over the top or anything, or brutal or gory. So once that's over, we cut to Sarah and her friends. They're driving down to Louisiana on this road trip. They stop at a gas station. There's like a pervert gas station attendant who's spying on Sarah and her friend. Sarah's played by Sarah Paxton, and her friend is played by Catherine McPhee, who you might recognize from like American Idol back in the day. I have to say off the bat, none of the women in this movie are bad to look at. There's like three pretty much gorgeous women as like the leading three girls. And then you have like some superfluous, typical 2000s, 2010s guys there. One of the guys I do recognize from Grandma's Boy, and he was also in, I think, that first Hatchet movie. So it was kind of fun seeing him here. But after that interaction with the gas station worker, the kids end up at this lake house they're supposed to go to, and they have a pool nearby, and of course this giant lake. They have jet skis and a little mini boat. They're excited to be out there, but while they're out there playing around the water, one of the friends ends up getting bit by the shark that we saw from the prologue, or at least maybe one of the many sharks that's in the lake, and he loses his arm. And we see the main male character, who I guess is the boyfriend of the lead chick here, jump in to retrieve his arm, but then he gets confirmation that there is indeed a shark in the water. And they manage to bandage up their friend, get him back inside into bed, and they realize now that they're in a really shitty situation. They're kind of isolated from the rest of the world. They need to get their friend to the hospital, so what they're going to have to do is hop in a boat and drive off to the nearest town so they can get to the hospital. And in the process of doing so, there's a really over-the-top chase sequence because the guy's arm is leaking blood, or the shark is chasing this boat, ends up knocking it, knocks the guy's girlfriend off the boat, and the girlfriend ends up getting eaten off screen by a shark. And once the guy realizes this, he starts to think that maybe all of this is just too much to handle, and in the pandemonium of the shark, hitting the boat, it kind of malfunctions the motor, and there's this whole over-the-top boat crash scene where all they now have left is their jet skis. Meanwhile, the group, the remaining survivors, I think there's Catherine McPhee's character, the guy from Grandma's Boy, and then you have another, generic white guy, and Sarah and her boyfriend. They devise a plan that they're going to have to split up and maybe look for help. So the guy from Grandma's Boy and Catherine McPhee decide to get help from these nearby people that they meet, and they go off into their own subplot. And the rest of them have to figure out how they're going to get their friend on jet skis to the hospital. So they come up with this idea while Catherine McPhee and the guy from Grandma's Boy is out of the equation, to put him on a jet ski and take him to the hospital that same route, but they're going to go at night when I guess there's nobody around to, I think, get in the way of it all. But meanwhile, these strangers that the other two that ventured off with, that they met, they end up being like pretty much recontextualized into this bad guy syndicate, essentially. And there's this big ulterior plan going on with these two and bringing sharks into this lake. And there may or may not be a third culprit, which involves this police chief played by Donald Logue, who played the dad in Grounded for Life, which is one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. Seeing him in this movie, around this time, he was also in movies like the Silent Night remake. It kind of fits that he was in Silent Night and in Shark Night. So he, of course, comes into the story, and unfortunately, as he comes into the story, some other characters get off. We see the death of two characters, possibly with those two strangers. We see the guy trying to tote the guy that got his arm bit off, possibly have a CGI shark attack on him and his friend that he's trying to save. So there's two survivors. You have Sarah Paxton and her boyfriend in the story. And once the big bad is revealed, that it's pretty much, if you haven't put two and two together, and together yet. It's probably going to be the police chief. They end up getting separated, and we get to learn more of one of the strangers from early on in the story and how they are pretty much behind all of this to get revenge on a certain character for something that happened to them. And let's just say the two survivors find themselves in sticky situations, and they may or may not get themselves out of it. And that plays into a climax involving the real bad guys and the survivors, and we see what comes out of that. And then the story ends on a cliffhanger because there might be more sharks. So that essentially is the movie Shark Night. So yeah, this movie, I'm going to be upfront. I do have some positives with it, even though, like I mentioned before, I'm kind of mid on it. Here's the thing I love about this movie. It's unapologetically B-movie, and sometimes if you're able to give yourself into the madness of something, or if you're able to suspend that disbelief to get over logic hurdles, you're going to probably enjoy something like this more. Now, here's the thing about it. There are really dumb decisions by the characters in this movie. Trust me, like the guy going in after his friend's arm is really dumb. There's some character decisions from the remaining survivors throughout the story that make no fucking sense too, that get them in hot water. There's also some pervy shit in here too, you know, if I want to go into some negatives real quick. Yeah, why is that shit here? But I guess it fits the time because back in these times, horror movies were still kind of edgy. With that aside, I do think that the movie is fun. It knows what it is, and I think David Ellis, at his best and at his worst, knows how to orchestrate over-the-top stunt sequences. And I think, you know, while I hate the Final Destination, the fourth installment of that franchise, even the death sequences in there, sometimes they could be horrendous, and sometimes they could be just rip-offs of other movies. He's able to actually do some special things here and there. As in this movie, given the fact that he has a CGI shark to work with, given the fact that all these over-the-top stunt sequences might as well be something that Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer wrote themselves in a Drive Angry sequel or something crazy batshit like that. It was a fun movie, you know, despite all the dumb shit in it. I do think that the girls in the acting ensemble, I think specifically the women, like Katharine McPhee and Sarah Paxton, they did a phenomenal job. I think the guy's name is Chris Carmack, or maybe Dustin Milligan, whatever one of those are, the boyfriend. He did a pretty good job. Donald Logue playing the police chief, he was great here too. The setting being in the lake, you do get the vibe that they're kind of stuck there, and that does kind of add to the peril of the story, and it makes me buy into the suspense of it all. So I think that worked for it as well. And yeah, I do think one last positive I can say about it is the fact that when I remember seeing it in the theater, I can't really speak on it now because even though I have my 4K player that plays Blu-ray 3Ds and I have my Blu-ray 3D TV, I haven't seen it today to justify this. There are some sequences I can remember that were really fun to see in the theaters in 3D, and it makes it kind of like that gimmick movie to experience in that realm. If I've ever seen one, it kind of adds, I think it would add to the experience of this as opposed to just seeing it in 2D. So yeah, some positives there. But the negatives, y'all, there's like no story to this. And here's the thing about the movie. It just kind of hobbles along events. It's kind of like that plotless camp slasher that you would sometimes get back in the 1980s. And you have pretty much an identical setup to those, where you get thrown into a group of characters. You know nothing about them. They're just making jokes, lighthearted jokes to get you to kind of sympathize with them or find them charming or something. And that kind of works. But there's no believability in the character writing here. There's relationships established previously, but we have no real weight on those relationships. There's this tight-knit friend group, but throughout the movie, they hardly act like friends until the guy gets his arm bit off by a shark, and that kind of forces them to try to solve the situation. Unfortunately, the movie's kind of, in terms of character progression, is caught in that limbo of just manicness from the urgency to save their friend, and we don't really get a vibe of who these people really are. So there's no characters to build on in the story, and as the story goes along, you kind of realize that it's just building up set piece after set piece to utilize the shark to create some suspense or to kill off one of these teenagers or college students. And that's kind of annoying. All the story is pretty much in the back half where you get those recontextualizations about the strangers and the police chief and all that. And while that's kind of just over the top and ridiculous, it quite is over the top and ridiculous. Even when you turn your brain off to this shit, just what the fuck, man? It's the most redundant thing I think I've seen in a creature feature movie in some time, where these guys, they just think that it's cool to use sharks in a saltwater lake to kill people that they don't like. And when you hear their motives, there's only one person that has sound motives in this whole story in terms of the villains. All the other ones don't make fucking sense. It's just really dumb. And yeah, you know, when we get to the CGI parts of this movie, the shark looks like shit. Okay, I'm sorry. The multiple sharks, I should say. Even that one scene with Catherine McPhee and those baby sharks, they all look terrible. The blood in this movie, even though there's some cool shots within the water of like a POV of the shark, or like the shark coming up to the person and then you see blood kind of, you know, floating around in the water, I do think that that's real. But most of the blood in this movie is CGI. I think one of the cringiest scenes I can think of in this movie is that scene at nighttime when that one guy is transporting the guy without the arm at night on the jet ski. And that whole chase sequence is so bad. Especially one of the characters' deaths. It's so just over the top and dumb that after that point of that character's death, I just mentally clocked out for the rest of the movie. And I was like, okay, this movie's just really fucking stupid. And yeah, most of the shark deaths in here pretty much look terrible. So there's that. And I guess one last negative about it. Here's the thing about the music. The music isn't that good in this movie. The color correction, the color hues, I guess to match the 3D effects for the RealD 3D, doesn't look near as good as some other horror movies. As a matter of fact, as much as people love to bash that Texas Chainsaw 3D movie, I think that probably has some of the best color correction to a 3D movie I've seen in the genre. Maybe Final Destination 5 or My Bloody Valentine 3D. But this movie's color correction, good lord, I had to adjust my my color quality on my TV to be able to not have myself blinded by how bright the colors were in it. It was just really obscene. But yeah, all in all, this is going to be a shorter review. I don't really have much else to say about this. It's pretty much a cut and dry movie if I've ever seen one. It's just teenagers / college students trying to survive a shark attack in the middle of a lake. And as dumb as that sounds, that's really this movie. You have some over-the-top Scooby-Doo-ish villains that just are really dumb. And yeah, it's meant to be this way, though. It's meant to be like you catch it at like a Blockbuster and you see it on a streaming app like Tubi for free, and it piques your interest and you watch it, and then you go about your life and come back to it years later, maybe watch it again or never watch it again ever. That's this kind of movie. It's not that revisitable. I can see why this was put into Dollar Trees. The quality just isn't here all that much, but I do think that the positives to this movie do kind of balance out a good amount of the negatives, just because it's so much, it is kind of fun. Like I said, the girls are easy to look at, and there's certain aspects to it that really do kind of shine through, and it can make you laugh, and you can have fun with it if you give yourself to it at certain points. I'd probably give this movie like maybe like a 2.75 out of 5 stars. I'd probably give this like an okay, or maybe like a high okay. pushing decent. It's not quite a decent movie to me. I think for me to give like a 3 out of 5 stars these days, there has to be something somewhat revisitable to it. This just doesn't have that. But if I ever catch this on television or something, and if I'm in the mood, I might put it on. But after many years not watching it, since I've seen it in its entirety in the theater, I can say that this one has not aged well. And I can kind of see why I never really sat through it on airings on ABC Family or anything, because there's not a lot to this movie, and it's not that good. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Shark Night. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this movie before, or you've seen it in 3D, or maybe you saw it back in the day in the theaters. What are your thoughts on this film? Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.